Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Why Everyone Plays. Having talked about mostly skirmishers and assassins in the series as of late, let's take a trip back down to support and make a well-deserved chapter on one of the most brilliantly designed champions in the game, Thresh the Chain Warden. This boss has received no shortage of discussion and praise for his extremely aggressive nature despite being a support. At least for me. When I first saw him, I was surprised to find out he was a support when his appearance looked very jungle or top oriented. Definitely someone I'm excited to talk about, and I'd like to give a shout out to the Thresh main subreddit for helping me with making this video. So let's not waste any more time and get started. Supports have it hard down there. They're responsible for pulling a lot of slack for the AD carry and by extension the whole team by supplementing them with things they lack. Crowd control, buffs, initiation, things like that. And oftentimes they get very little respect for it. Now, playmaking supports such as Leona, Nautilus, and Blitzcrank are a lot easier to attribute credit to than enchanters such as Lulu, Janna, or Yuumi because, visually speaking, landing a hook or locking down the enemy carry looks more significant than a clutch shield on your teammate protecting you from an assassin, mostly just because you can see the actual effect of what's going on. Whether that is or isn't the case depends on situation to situation. That being said, it's a prevailing belief that carrying on a support the role that's designed to enable their teammates rather than themselves is hard to do. Fortunately, Riot has been releasing a lot more supports with considerably higher personal agency with the release of Senna, Seraphine, Pyke, and to a lesser extent maybe Swain's rework. Now, support mains can put themselves in a position to contribute equal if not more pressure than their AD carries. But the original champion that gave players the hope of carrying games was Thresh, the uncontested most popular support in the game by leaps and bounds. Any support main worth their salt has this guy in their back pocket at the very least. Even as we've seen a lot more supports join the game over the past half decade, he single-handedly has occupied no less than 20% of the market share for his role. Countless players, amateur and pro alike, have gravitated towards him over the years, and despite being out for so long, he's still one of the most skill-expressive characters in the game. What I find interesting is that in a lot of circumstances, he's a bigger element of concern for the enemy team than his own team's carries, not because he does a lot of damage, but because of the number of ways he can back you into a corner or completely mess up your game plan if you're not paying attention to him at all times. You don't really see that on a lot of champions, even tanks. Sure, if you're playing a squishy immobile mage or marksman, you bet your ass the enemy Leona or Blitzcrank is making a beeline for you. But after their initial engage, most players can sort of ignore them and focus on the targets actually doing the damage. The same holds true for Thresh though, but there's a reason why he's always an intimidating presence, and I'm not just talking about how scary he looks. Thresh has the highest playmaking potential out of any support in the game. Period. Yuumi players, shut up. He's also arguably the most versatile support in the game, armed with equal parts engage and disengage, which are practical in a vast amount of situations. He may not have the same protective capabilities as enchanters, but there's almost no combination of team compositions or metas where he's not a viable pick for his team. Supports have a rather curious experience in League. Usually team composition doesn't matter all too much in solo queue because very rarely do you ever find a group of 5 people actually coordinating together to achieve victory, and so players normally pick whatever they want and hope for the best. However, more attention is given to the support whenever something goes wrong. At the start of the video, I mentioned how the value of a support usually depends on how well they can cover their team's shortcomings. If they're running low on hard CC, slap on a Nautilus or Alistar. If the enemy team has a lot of fighters and you have a lot of squishies, bring over a Lulu or Soraka. Thresh is not only really skill expressive, but he also brings so much to the table for a lot of situations, making him a safe all-purpose generalist. You don't really see too many supports who can switch gears. Leona can only really engage aggressively. Soraka can only heal and protect her teammates. Vel'Koz can only deal damage. His flexibility extends beyond his kit too, as his synergy with runes and items allows him to go for either beefy tank with Aftershock, Thornmail, Locket, Knight's Vow, or he can opt for a more protective utility-focused support with Redemption, Shurelia's Battle Song, Zeke's Convergence, and Mikhail's. Most supports are forced to buy certain core items since they're either the only items that work on that champion or they're necessary to patch up some innate problems such as mana issues or cooldowns. Thresh struggles with neither. He can build for just about any job that demands him. I know one thing I tend to say a lot in Why No One Plays is that it's better to do one job at 100% capacity than 2 jobs at only 50%. Thresh is a champion who has access to 2 different functions, but he can operate both of them simultaneously at an average of perhaps 75%, making him proficient enough to perform what is required of him. Sure, he may not be nearly as durable as the likes of dedicated tanks like Braum or Leona, nor does he provide the same augmentation as Lulu or Yumi, but he can still provide for the team without compromising too much effectiveness on either front, which brings me to my second point. By nature, he's a tank support. He builds mostly tank items and takes tanky runes. You would expect him to have the same weaknesses as a tank in that regard, but not true at all. He is neither Vanguard nor Warden. He's a controller, which allows him to shift gears at a moment's notice, from aggressively trying to hunt down fleeing enemies to protecting his allies from pursuers, and this versatility is reflected throughout his entire kit. Thresh is a character with many hats, so let's talk about his abilities to establish some context, starting with his most iconic attack, Death Sentence. Throwing his scythe in a target direction that stuns the first enemy struck for a second and a half, and during this time he yanks the chain twice, dragging them towards him. If he so desires, he can recast the ability to immediately dash to the hooked enemy, essentially making Death Sentence a mixture of Silas's E and Pyke's Q. Interestingly enough, this ability has the longest stun duration out of all other hook type attacks at 1.5 seconds, meaning even at close range it doubles as a lockdown ability. Up next is Dark Passage, which I believe to be the best ability in his kit. Thresh throws his lantern towards a target location that grants vision of its surroundings, fitting since it's a lantern. If an allied champion walks towards the lantern and clicks on it, they immediately dash to Thresh's current location, and both are granted a shield. There's so much utility this ability brings. You can use it to scout Fog of War, to save allies caught out, to bring allies into a fight, or to save someone dying from Ignite, things like that. Then we have Flay. The passive effect is mostly just bonus on-hit magic damage, which, aside from cheesy full crit one-shot builds, isn't all too special. As for the active effect, Thresh sweeps a massive area around him back to front, which knocks enemies in the direction of the sweep and then slowing them for a bit. It doesn't do that much damage even for a support, but the huge area it covers along with the displacement makes it one of the best disruption tools in the game. I'll get more into that in a little bit. Let's just talk about the ultimate next. The Box. That's literally what it's called, the Box. Such an apt name for one of the best ultimates a support can have. To many players, it may seem kind of weak if compared to the likes of Nautilus's Depth Charge or Lulu's Wild Growth, since there's no hard crowd control or anything of the sort. So allow me to explain. It's a giant area that lasts for 5 seconds. 5 walls that can each do a big chunk of magic damage and slow you by 99% for 2 seconds. 99%. The Box is criminally underrated for how practical it is for literally any fight. It isn't a stunner knockup, but a 99% slow essentially means you're not moving anywhere for 2 seconds, so it may as well be a root. Now that I talked about each ability, let's go over why they're so versatile. Death Sentence is the best hook in the game because it offers you a choice. There's a ton of other hooks, Nautilus Q, Silas E, Pyke Q, Blitzcrank Q, and to some extent Clyde's Q, but Thresh is the only one that allows you to decide if you want to go in or not. Someone actually on my thread explained it pretty well. Have you ever asked, what if you make a wrong hook? No, not missing your hook. You hooked successfully, but on a fed Volibear with 300 armor. I bet your AD carry won't be happy if you use Blitzcrank, Pyke, or Nautilus. However, Thresh's hook gives you the freedom to approach or not approach. That flexibility is why his hook is the best. I cannot agree more. There are so many times where Blitzcrank accidentally yanks the Rammus right into our Caitlyn and we lose the game because of it. The easiest way to counter hook champions is with the really dangerous frontline on your team, who would very much like to be pulled into the middle of the enemy team. Thresh is the only hook champion who doesn't need to worry about this because he can just simply choose not to take it. Dark Passage can be used to either save an ally who got caught out by pulling them to safety, or if you land a hook on an enemy champion, you can pull yourself towards them while using the lantern to have a teammate tag along. Flay can be used aggressively by sweeping enemies into your team after running in with Death Sentence, and the slow should be enough to keep them in place for the rest of your allies to catch up. Or if you find yourself in a bad situation, you can flay champions away from you as they get off me tool. The Box has the same purposes as Flay. You can cast it to trap escaping enemy champions or place it on top of yourself while running away to impede pursuit. While he's part of the Catcher subclass next to his fellow hook supports Blitzcrank and Pyke, he stands in a class of his own, as even Bard, well known for his clever ways to mess with the enemy team, can't hold a candle to the level of disruption Thresh has access to. Since he can weaponize his abilities to incite death and prevent it, it also opens up the opportunity for a ton of mix-ups and mind games. It's easy to anticipate other supports since they usually can only do things one particular way, but Thresh can put the enemy team in a position where they won't know what he's gonna do. Is he gonna engage, disengage, is he going for a trade or all in? I already mentioned the unique privilege you have with Death Sentence, being able to choose if you do or don't want to go. But one thing I haven't covered yet is that unlike other hook champions, Thresh's Death Sentence has a longer casting animation, which may sound like a negative at first because it's not instantaneous, but pay attention to how Thresh moves on screen right now. If you noticed, he doesn't actually change direction until after he throws the hook, which means you can pretend like you're walking to hook the person in front of you, when in reality you're grabbing someone to the side or even behind you. This is especially deadly in lane since you can trick the enemy Morgana into thinking you're trying to tag her AD carry, so she'll preemptively black shield them only to find out you were actually trying to get her. As for Dark Passage, there is no other champion in the game who can save their allies the way Thresh does. If someone is caught out in a bad spot, you can literally give them a free escape tool, whereas enchanters have to put themselves at risk to rescue their teammates. And of course, if your jungle card this with like an express ticket right smack dab in the middle of the fight, there's no other champion who can do that for him. Okay, maybe Bard, but it's way more restrictive and easier to see coming. You have to account for so many other contingencies because if you see Thresh walking up to you, there might be a Rengar over the wall he can toss the lantern to, and all of a sudden you're screwed. You've probably seen a ton of Thresh players knock a Kha'Zix or Tristana mid-jump, or maybe flay a Gragas body slam or Shen taunt before it connects. Few supports can do this as consistently because they usually either have short range or are much harder to land. How often do you see a Blitzcrank hook yank someone mid-dash, or an Alistar Pulverize interrupt a Zac jump? It's a lot harder to do since they don't have the same level of area coverage as Thresh. His E can deny so many champions, and has a much more generous timing window and hitbox than even Janna's Howling Gale. Now, a bit of a side note, I think it's amazing how they designed the champion to be so manipulative. There's an excerpt in Lucian's old lore when Thresh was able to capture Senna, describing him as deviously clever and cruel, and in his own lore it's written that he's sadistic and cunning. It makes perfect sense. Thresh's entire playstyle is about mind games, pressuring the enemy team into guessing what he's gonna do, then faking them out by doing something completely different. It's what makes him so satisfying to play and so scary to play against, because when you're staring down a really good Thresh player, you play by his rules. This last part may be a minor point, but a point nonetheless. Thresh is really strong. Despite being effective right out the gate at level 3, he scales well into the mid to late game in terms of numbers. Most supports rely on their base stats to survive since they don't have access to much gold and support items don't provide too many stats. If given a lead, Thresh can become increasingly harder to go up against as his damage and durability begin to outstrip that of other supports, who usually just get more bulk. It's very possible for a good Thresh to have close to 80 to 100 souls by level 18, which puts you at the same base amount as Nautilus or Braum, while also having more AP, stronger damage on your Flay auto, and a bigger shield. Tank supports generally have to rely on their base damage to get the job done, since they don't have the opportunity to build any damaging items aside from perhaps Sunfire Aegis or Thornmail. But it's not too unlikely for Thresh to do close to 1000 damage to a squishy AD carry or mage if he lands his Q, E, ultimate, any fully empowered Flay auto. Again, small but something to point out, infinite scaling is infinite scaling, and he doesn't fall off late game the way Blitzcrank does. So there you have it, Thresh, beautifully designed champion, badass, someone you'd probably crack open a cold one with, and really satisfying to play. He has equal parts strength and playmaking potential while not suffering from any major weakness aside from being easily kiteable if he misses his hook. But that's more hinged on a player's bad aim than his own deficiencies. Frankly speaking, his kit is quite overloaded, but it's fair. He's got a big bag of tricks that you have to watch out for, but he's also someone who can be easily dealt with if you play the neutral game really well. Thing is, no one in solo queue knows how to play neutral, they just go in whenever they can, which works in his favor. He's a champion almost everyone respects. He doesn't have a super toxic stereotypical fanbase the way Yasuo and Riven mains do, and it's always fun to have a Thresh on your team that actually lands his hooks. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, a rating would be much appreciated, and if you'd like to see more content like this, consider subscribing to the channel. Also check out the description down below for links to my Discord and social media, as well as a playlist containing all my Why Everyone Plays videos if you want to watch more. Shoutouts once again to the Thresh main subreddit for helping me make this video, but that's it for today. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for the next one. Take care.